Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3. This is part 2 of our risk management lecture. This week we are looking at chapters 4 and 5. And then there's also a PDF on risk management that was discussed in the overview video. So I'm going to highlight that PDF real quick again. This is by Gary Gray out of Montana State University in Billings. This is a great paper on identifying some of the responsibilities and risks and how to manage risk behaviors for high school principals, specifically looking at what principals have to do to oversee or, as they supervise high school PE programs and athletic departments. A really good paper kind of highlighting some of the different things like tort laws and such, risk management that pops up in athletic facilities, especially in education settings, so physical education programs specifically. Ties in really well with our chapter readings this week, so make sure you dive into that. I'm going to go right into the first chapter, which is chapter 4 on agency law. This is kind of some interesting content. Basically, I'm just going to, like I've done in previous weeks, I'm just going to go to the highlighted slides that you'll see when you download the PowerPoint. That's really what I want you to focus on. So what is agency law? Basically, the term agency law is referring to the governing of the relationship between a client and their agent, and specifically saying the principal. Principal is the client, right? So between a principal and an agent, the client is, our athletes, our students, or the client you're working with in a private setting. The agent is yourself, the working professional, the owner of the facility, or a coach, a teacher, so forth, right? So this is a law also governs the relationship between the agent and third parties the agent deals with on behalf of the principal. So in a school setting, it would refer to the coach being the agent, and the third party being the school that's involved in providing the facilities for the athlete. So there's multiple parties involved, or really, I guess it would be actually the school would be the main agent, and then the coach would be the third party, or vice versa. But the point is that the coach is represented by the school, but it also can be represented privately. So it can get a little interesting. So basically, what I want you to focus on in this chapter is understanding what the agency is, how this law affects sports. The big thing for sport agents, so us as coaches or strength coaches or athletic directors or so forth, our goal is to make sure that we are overseeing and have sound contracts in place to protect both ourselves as well as the facility we use and the individuals who are using our facility, so our athletes or our students. So some things to look into: negotiating employment contracts, concessions agreements, organizations in negotiations with sponsors, advertisers, media, team organization into events. So, if you're entering your team into a tournament, negotiating those type of contracts if necessary. A lot of times the athletic director oversees a lot of these things. So as a coach, you may not see it, but if you are an athletic director, then this is something you'll probably be dealing with at the physical education setting. If you're working with professional athletes, then you're probably more hands-on with these types of contracts and agreements. Okay, a few other things. Financial planning is involved in this, investment, appearance, opportunities, and so forth. It gets kind of interesting depending on who you're working with, because the roles of these laws and how they affect you will depend on your setting. And usually with professional athletes, there's more contracts and rules to abide by, because most of the physical education settings, like for high school and college, are kind of already set in stone with like the NCAA and so forth. Which is, if you've ever had to deal with NCAA policies, I've had an opportunity to look and actually oversee a lot of them at a university. There's many loops to navigate. So there's a lot of rules, a lot of contracts to look over. Okay, so agency formation, basically looking at by contract, rules of contract formation apply. So putting together a contract that both parties agree to. That's the goal. You want to protect both yourself and the individual you're working with. For example, anybody who's worked in personal training. I worked as a personal trainer for many number of years, just as like a side job, especially getting myself through college. And one of the best things I ever did was come up with a written legal document that I had all my clients sign that basically litigated the risk of injury and liability. And so that's probably the number one contract to have as a personal trainer, is to have something written in writing that is signed by your client, indicating that they understand the risk associated with exercising, that basically they're giving up their right to sue you if they get hurt during exercise, unless, of course, it was negligence on my part. Right. So there's always those issues. But so some of the duties: agent to principal and principal to agent. What we want to do is make sure that we are working diligently with our client or clients. So it says fiduciary duty: agent must act for the benefit of the principal. So there's things like duty of loyalty, obedience, and so forth. Fair compensation, reimbursement of expenses, compensate for losses, duty of good conduct. These are all things that the agent, or the principal, owes to the agent, right, for basically providing the service. Now, understanding liability, it says liability is as follows: principal is liable to the contract, agent is not liable unless agent acts for undisclosed or partially disclosed principal. If apparent authority exists, principal is liable, and so is the agent, who must reimburse the principal. So basically, these contracts are set up to protect us, the agent, unless we do something to basically negligently break our contracts. At the end of the chapter, it talks about the regulation of athlete agents. This is where it gets kind of interesting, navigating our athletes. There's some state laws and uniform athlete laws to look into. These are kind of fascinating. I'm not going to go too deep into these. You can read. There's a case study on this, the Sparta case study. Something that I thought was interesting about this is we are seeing changes in this, and even now that the NCAA is allowing athletes to promote themselves and make money off their own name. So that's going to be kind of an interesting area that may change some of these laws. Let me pull up our second chapter real quick. This is just talking about contracts themselves, so the contract law. Basically, this is a continuation of the previous chapter, but focusing on how to put together the contract and what it means. So 3 required elements: an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. Basically, we give an offer to the agent, they accept it, and then there's things up for consideration. We see this in professional athletes where they have like bonus clauses or whatever if they perform well and so forth. Those of us working with student athletes, it's going to look a little bit different. In fact, let me scroll down to college contracts. Here we go. Student athletes contracts with the university. Basically, a letter of intent is signed and then scholarship is provided. And that's usually as far as it goes. I have seen clauses where coaches will say you perform well, then you could get additional scholarship money. Ironically, that happened to me when I was a freshman. I was a redshirt freshman. I was recruited at a university to play soccer. I was a freshman, so the coach thought I was talented, wanted to bring me in, offered me a minimal scholarship, and said if you become the starter and you play X number of games, which is like at least half the season, and I had to beat out a junior goalkeeper that was on the team, and he thought I was potentially better than him, but I needed to, grow. I was a freshman. Anyways, long story short, I ended up taking over the starting position in the beginning of the season. It was kind of like a slam dunk, I thought. Had a couple bad games halfway through the season, and coach got upset, benched me, and I played maybe a fourth of the games throughout the rest of the season. At the end of the year, he denied me the scholarship bonus. So we disputed it. There was no legal contract written, which is my fault. I should have pushed for a contract. Ended up not getting anything, so I left the school and went and played for somebody else. Anyways, long story short, negotiations can be made, but make sure that they are in contract. Don't let sketchy coaches talk you out of or talk you into something that's not in a legal document. There's also employment contracts with athletes. Basically, these are mostly signed towards the league, and there are certain contracts that the league will oversee. Now, this is where it gets interesting because, so that's for coaches. For athletes, endorsement contract, these are changing because now the athletes, like in the NCAA, they're now approved to promote themselves. So it'll be interesting to see how they change this legally and what that will look like in years to come. And of course, coaches, college and professional, the salaries, benefits, termination, those contracts are all written up as well. Again, going back to waivers and releases, like I talked about earlier, always have to have a contract that's signed. Students sign these, coaches sign these. Remedies for damages, specific performance, duty to mitigate, and so forth. And then the last things to highlight in this chapter to pay attention to is how do we manage our contracts. Obviously, big thing is get everything in writing, read the contract thoroughly, keep copies of your contracts. Probably be good to keep hard copies or at least scan them and save them in a computer, which is what I typically do. Keep good faith when negotiating contracts. Note deadlines for performance. Ensure performance of third parties. Share contract information with those that need to know. Educate your staff and so forth. So those are the big things, the big takeaways from this chapter. All right, as always, if you have any other questions about this content, feel free to email me or reach out. Otherwise, keep digging into this week's risk management topic on the CAP 2 assignment, and then also take quiz 3. Talk to you soon.